Assumption is a word that you're going to hear a lot in this class this year. And if you look it up in the dictionary, I don't know what it might say there, but this is what I mean when I use the word assumption in the scientific sense of the word. An assumption is an idea that is based on little or no evidence. Doesn't mean it's wrong, though. It could be based on some previous experiences that you've had, but your previous experiences may be incomplete, and that may be why you have that assumption. For example, many people assume, because they've never seen anything but white swans, that all swans are white. The first time you see a swan that isn't white, like a black one, you might think, wow, is that some kind of accident that happened to that swan? But there are actually in nature swans that are not white. And so the assumption that you have that, swans are all white turns out to be wrong. But it could be that you're correct in thinking that, right? I'm sure you probably think that all elephants are gray, and that assumption probably is correct. As far as I know, there are no elephants of other colors out there. It's good to compare the word assumption to the word inference because they're related to each other. An inference is an idea that's based on a reasonable amount of evidence, but the evidence is indirect. You don't have proof that your inference is correct, so therefore it could still be right or wrong, but at least it's based on something, and it's probably a little bit more than what your assumption is based on. Assumptions are based on, remember, little to no evidence. Inferences, it's a little bit more than that. So how can you tell the difference between an assumption and an inference? I'll give you some examples. Here's a situation from real life. This actually happened to me. My husband and I were walking down the street in a major city, and we saw a man lying in the side of the road in the gutter like this. And we both had different reactions to this because we both had different ways of interpreting the same situation. He had one inference and one assumption, and I had another. If you look down at the bottom, here's an explanation of two different people having the same reaction that my husband and I did. On the left-hand side, person one says, there's a man lying in the gutter, that's the situation, and he infers that the man is a bum. This is kind of what my husband did. He just kind of assumed that only bums lie in gutters. Who else would lie down in the gutter except for somebody who's a bum? And then on the other side, this is how I reacted to it. I said, well, there's a man lying in the gutter, that's the situation. But I had the inference from that the man is in need of help. Why did I think that? Well, because I had an underlying assumption that I believe anyone lying in the gutter is in need of help. Now, this isn't about being right or wrong, right? Either one of us could have been right. He could have been a bum, he could have been in need of help, right? Either one of those things could be true. The important thing here is to realize the difference between an inference and an assumption, right? An inference is based on some evidence, an assumption is based on limited to no evidence. So look at the difference for person one. For me to infer that the man is a bum, it's somewhat reasonable. That's a reasonable inference. There is some evidence that many people who do lie in gutters are doing so because they're bums, meaning people without a job or without a home, homeless people, whatever you want to use. But the assumption, it comes completely without any evidence. The assumption that only bums lie in gutters, there's no evidence for that, right? And then look at number two, same thing. The inference that I made was that the man was in need of help. That was based on the fact that sometimes people who are lying down in the street are in need of help. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not, though. My assumption that anyone lying in the gutter is in need of help is based on no real evidence, right? Some people will need help, some won't. As it turned out, in the real life situation, both things were true. The man was a quote-unquote bum, right? A person who didn't have a job and was just sort of homeless and just wandering around on the streets. But he also did turn out to be in need of help. He was bleeding from his head because he had fallen down. So your assumptions and your inferences can be wrong. The difference between an inference and assumption is really just in the degree of evidence you have to back it up. Assumptions are not acceptable in science. You want to try to avoid making assumptions whenever possible. But inferences are okay. Your inferences are how you get closer to the truth. Just make sure you know why you think something. If you have no real rational reason for thinking it, it's probably an assumption and not an inference. See you in the next tutorial.